Hi, my name's Phil and welcome to LabourVision, where we take a look at Labour's policies in a particular area. Today, with the Labour conference fresh in our minds, we're going to take a look at housing policies. I'll be discussing what Labour have talked about in that conference last week, as well as maybe a cheeky bit of political thinking of my own, which you won't hear Labour saying out loud, but maybe they'll be thinking it. But first, if you'd like to hear more about Labour's policies, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So before I go over these housing policies, just a note about last week's video on HS2. I said at the time that I thought Labour should deal with it by ordering a full public inquiry and announce it as soon as possible as well. Well, imagine my surprise when they did just that the following day at the conference. But anyway, house building. And Labour have promised to build 1.5 million homes over 5 years in the next Parliament. Now, it doesn't take a maths genius to work out that this is 300,000 houses a year, and that is often what is being reported. And the Tories are complaining that Labour are just adopting their own target. We've got a target of 300,000, this is just the same. However, a couple of things to bear in mind. First, the Tories abandoned their target last year and never actually achieved it anyway. Labour say that the difference with them is that they won't just set a target, but they'll meet it. Indeed, the last Labour government did meet their housing targets. The Tories have never done so in a single year of government. Secondly, you don't just get up to your target within the first year. It's not like, oh, we're going to do 300,000 new homes a year, and then first year, there you go, 300,000 new homes. You have to build up to it. For Labour to be able to say they're going to build 1.5 million homes over 5 years, that's not actually 300,000 a year. That means they're going to have to get up to more than 300,000 a year, because I really don't think they've got a cunning plan to get 300,000 in the first year right from the start. But the big question is, how will Labour succeed where the Tories failed? Because there are some policies where the Conservatives don't really want to succeed. This isn't one of them. You know, to answer it, what we have to do is we have to look at why the Tories failed, because building new homes is in their interests as well. They derive much of their core support from homeowners. So, of course, they need to keep building houses. By strangling the supply of new houses, especially affordable homes, the Tories actually cut off their supply of future voters. And now look where they are. And this is something that they're only just coming to terms with now. They're only just starting to realise this. So what stopped them? Well, I suppose you could think of two types of house building, really. There's adding to existing communities. Now, the problem there is, of course, NIMBY attitudes, not in my backyard, in a lot of the Tory heartlands. Now, it's not such a big issue in the North Midlands and the North. Like, I live in a very strong Conservative area in the North Midlands. But there's housing development. There's new houses being built here. I've seen no visible signs of protest against it. We've got a Conservative MP. We've got Conservative councillors, a very strong Conservative council. But in the Tory heartlands down south, you get a lot of NIMBY attitudes. Now, it's what caused Rishi Sunak to back down last year and not impose the housing targets that were in the Tories' manifesto. This despite the fact that his red wall Tory MPs absolutely wanted them. Keir Starmer, in contrast, has said that he will ignore the NIMBY attitudes, even amongst his own MPs. It was put to him that what he was suggesting he'll do is ignore what the public think, but that's not true. The public want houses built. It just means ignoring the small number of self-interested, albeit noisy voices. Now, I will point out there can be genuine objections to new housing developments, yes. If they don't include enough affordable housing, of course, then it's like, well, what's the benefit to most people? Or if the infrastructure isn't properly developed to accommodate them, yeah, okay, we need to make sure that's in place. But we're not talking about ignoring valid objections. We're talking about ignoring the objections from people worried about what it'll do to the value of their house, which they already own, sod the rest of you. The second type of house building is away from established communities. Now, that avoids problems with NIMBY objections because there's no one in the area to object to. The hedgehogs are not that bothered. If they are, do you know what? They don't know how to make placards. But that means building in, potentially the green belts, and that attracts different types of objections. And this is where Labour are trying something a bit new. A little phrase emerged last week, didn't it? Starmer has already said, he'd said months ago, that they are going to build houses on the green belt. Now, polling tends to show something quite interesting. If you suggest to people that they're talking about building on the green belt, you tend to have quite a few objections from people who don't really understand what that means. When you explain what it means, you actually find that the objections disappear because the green belt's not what they thought it was. The green belt is not like fields and forests. The green belt is just the name for the space between towns and cities. Yes, it includes fields and forests, but it also includes areas which have already been concreted over and are not remotely green apart from the weeds. And this is what Labour are proposing is used for new housing, already developed areas. In order to shore up public support, they're trying to distinguish, and they're calling it the grey belt now. The parts of the green belt which are like at the side of existing roads or have already been developed and fallen into disuse or whatever. You know, in other words, it's already been developed. It's not green. There's no field there. There's concrete already there. Again, not uncommon to see these sorts of housing developments in the north. They're not that controversial up here, but there's a huge need for housing in the south. That's where most of the people live. And this is Labour's gamble, really. Can they get this idea of the grey belt into people's minds? Because we know from polling, if they can, people are actually on board with Labour's plans when they understand it. They're not always on board with Labour's plans as it is presented in the media. So can Labour get this grey belt into people's minds? If so, they'll have support. Labour have actually said they're going to build whole new towns. There's going to be accelerated building on brownfield sites, which is way less controversial as well. So it's not going to be the case that every new housing development has to overcome NIMBYism. The main focus is actually going to be housing in new areas anyway to avoid those conflicts in many cases. But as a little aside, Labour couldn't possibly say this. But there is a little thought that occurs to me. Now, as I said, some Tories are now recognising that they have messed up big time in not building more houses. It was short-term path of least resistance thinking that stuffed them in the long term, like going right back to George Osborne when asked by the Lib Dems, why aren't you building more houses? He said, because our existing voters don't want it. Well, what he really meant is they don't want it in their areas. Now, Tories now are thinking to themselves, well, we should have just built them where we're not going to get that backlash. And I'm trying to think now seriously about how they could have managed it. So without losing their existing support, some of them have talked about, well, we should have just forced the housing developments onto areas that don't vote for us anyway. Well, and I emphasise that nobody from Labour has said this. There's nothing to stop Starmer's government playing this sort of cute politics themselves, is there? There will be places that want the housing development. They're not a problem. Let them build them. Labour have promised to make the planning process easier to do so. The problem is where there is a need for housing, but local resistance from existing home owners. Well, maybe Labour dump the targets on places that don't vote for them anyway. In fact, if we're talking political shenanigans, that can work to kill two birds with one stone. Build housing in conservative areas, and who will buy them? Well, in the south, probably young professionals who can't afford to live in the city, so they buy houses a little further out and commute in. These are the sorts of people who are more likely to vote Labour than Conservative. So you might end up turning Conservative areas into marginals or even Labour-leaning areas. But like I say, that's just me thinking what some Tories are now saying they should have done and thinking, well, that could work for Labour as well, in terms of navigating the political minefield of housing policy. But in terms of Labour's explicit policies, it's for 1.5 million new houses over 5 years, developing brownfield sites and what they're now calling the grey belt for new communities, and sticking their fingers in their ears when NIMBY megaphones come out. So there we are. Those are Labour's main policies on housing that were announced in the last week. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to click the like button, subscribe, and check out the other videos on the channel, including the live streams on most mornings. And until next time, I'll see you later.